right, as promised in our last video, this is going to be our video to talk about our very best tips for picking your land, how we went through the process, and just the things we have learned. So what we want for this channel is for this to be a resource for anybody at any stage in the process. So we're going to keep adding videos and then they'll be there in perpetuity so that you guys can use them. But we have had to learn everything kind of the hard way. So we wanted to have one resource for you so that you could look at anything, any step that you're on and go to a video for that. So hopefully this will be incredibly helpful if you are just starting the process as we were a couple years ago. I'm going to break this down into 3 sections. 1, define your budget and some tips on doing that, especially if you are looking at buying your land separate from doing your build. That's what we are doing. And then also the resources you can use if you're going with a builder where it's kind of more of a package deal. Scouting your lot. I'm going to try not to be duplicative of the 1,000,001 incredible real estate resources there are out there. Kind of touch on some of those, but you guys know you can look up any realtor in your local area and they will help kind of guide you in that process. Or if you've bought a house before, it's a similar process as far as, what area and everything, but there are some differences when it comes to land. So we're going to highlight those. And then the third part is special concerns for Florida, especially Southwest Florida, but Florida in general. So if you are looking to build in Florida, it's gorgeous here. It's a great state to live in. We love it. We love raising our babies here. But there are some concerns that you're going to want to make sure you know about before you go into the land buying process and the building process. So I'm going to jump right into it, defining your budget. And also, just to say, we had hoped that Robbie could be here, but we were hoping to record this a week ago and we've had sick kids, so it's life. So defining your budget. How much do you want your total monthly housing payment to be? That's the first step. So we recommend doing, 25% of your budget. In Florida, that's not always possible based on wages and everything else and our cost of living down here. So we have found some creative ways to reduce our budget in other areas so we can afford a little bit more in the housing area. You just have to be creative, but 25% is always a great goal. That's a Dave Ramsey thing. So you can look that up. You can look up his process of doing things. He's got great tips too. So figure out the way to figure that out, because we're like, okay, great. So we know what we want our payment to be, but how does that play in with how much land we can afford? How much house, how much is a house going to be? We don't know. So here's what we did. Figure out what your ideal square footage is going to be. So if you know that you're living in a 1,500 square foot place right now and that feels perfect, stick with that. It feels too small, too big, obviously you can kind of make some changes. Go through some houses. So go to open houses and get a feel for, okay, we think we want 2,000 square feet. How could that lay out? And also keep in mind that different layouts, different ceiling heights are going to make a space live very differently. So draw on your own past living experiences and think about those. And square footage based on how it's laid out and how high the ceilings are can live completely differently. So that's what we've done. We've looked at, the different places we've lived over the years separately together and decided on what we want to be at. So then you can ask a couple of your local builders, what is your average cost per square foot right now? So that is going to be incredibly helpful, because if you say, okay, I want a 2,000 square foot house for easy numbers, and you find out that that is going to cost you $200 a square foot to build, that's a $400,000 build. On top of that, you're going to have your land cost. So if at 25% of your budget, that's going to put you way over the top, you're going to need to look at a couple things. You're going to need to look at reducing your square footage. You're going to need to look at buying a less expensive lot, which maybe mean that you want to live in the heart of town, but realistically, it's less expensive to live outside of town, or vice versa. You may need to look at that. You may need to reduce the square footage of your land that you're looking at. You may need to think about some things that you can do and start asking around to see in your area if you're legally allowed to do some of the work yourself. So we have plans to do some of the work ourselves that we know that legally we can do in our area. So you're going to take those numbers, figure out, like I said, okay, if it's $400,000 to build that house, you know that 25% of your monthly budget puts you at what a payment for a $500,000 house would be. Use the payment calculators online. They're very easy to use. You can go on like Realtor, and there's usually one plugged down in the app there. So figure out what that looks like, and you'll be able to see, okay, I have $100,000 to spend on land. Great, we got our budget. We can go forward. Are you going to be paying cash for your land? Are you going to be financing? Once you have that rough ballpark number, you can start to look at your own finances and say, okay, what do we have in the bank? Where could we cut back that we could save up some more money so that we could pay as much cash as possible for the land, or have as much cash on hand for the build? So, and then get pre-qualified for any needed financing. I think that's helpful, because then you go in there knowing like, okay, we're looking at all these things, but we know we can actually afford them too. So talk to your banks. We here in Florida, we have found that there are only a select number of banks that will do financing for building. So we had to take that into consideration and get a little creative with our financing for the land, and then knowing who we can go forward with for the build. So that is something else to consider. You may consider doing something where you buy the land with another family member if it's a large plot of land and something that will legally be allowed to be divided. Get creative. Make sure that you can, because it is a big investment. You don't want to be cash strapped, especially as you're going through the build process. You definitely don't want to be cash strapped. So that kind of helps you to define your budget, figure out how much you want to spend monthly, figure out how much that house is going to cost to build that you want to build, make those tweaks and changes, and then that'll leave you with leftover with what you have for land. And then start looking, see what's available in that price range, and if it's what you like, great. If it's not, you may need to make some flexes and say, okay, we're going to build a 1,500 square foot house with a barn out back that will give us the flexibility to later develop that. Or we're going to build it, we're going to pour foundation for the rest of it and know that we're going to finish and add a huge addition later, whatever that may look like, and design your roof line accordingly. All right, so step 2, scouting your lot. The usual things apply in real estate. Location, location, location. Of course, we love where we live. We live in a beautiful little kind of beachside town. So we knew we wanted to stay here, but we also knew for us, we needed a little bit of acreage because we have an excavation company. So those things don't always sleep somewhere else. Sometimes they come home at night and sleep at our house. So you need a place you can shove some big yellow equipment. So we needed that. So what town, what area of town do you want to be in? What neighborhood, what schools? Standard real estate stuff. Again, talk to a local realtor. They're going to be able to be an incredible resource for you. I love using if you're new to an area, I love using the Ramsey program because they kind of vet their people. So you can go through Dave Ramsey somehow, just go on their website. I'm sure it explains it. And find a professional if it's somewhere you don't know. Otherwise, use a family member or a friend that you know is experienced. Look into, so as you kind of narrow it down to, okay, we love this area of town. So we knew that we were probably going to be in either this area or this area of our little town. Look into if there's any special building requirements or additional costs. So do they have impact fees? The area that we're moving into, we will be paying, I think, for the next 5 years on our taxes for the road and sewer and water. This is where we need Robbie here. I just know how much it is. So we'll be paying for that for the next 5 years to finish paying off that investment. But we knew that going into buying the land. Call the permitting offices, call the code office, call the environmental protection agencies that are specific to that area, and see if there's any limitations. Another area of town we were looking at is something called the DRGR, and it is land that is held for managing water flow. In Florida, water is everything. We that's our tourism. That's why we all live here, because we're surrounded by this beautiful like ocean on one side, Gulf of Mexico on the other. But that requires maintenance, and this is also land that has been kind of stolen from the swamps. So we have to manage the water. Anyway, so we looked at that area of town, figured out what the regulations were, and while the property was so affordable, once you added in everything else that had to be done, we couldn't do it. We just couldn't afford it. Call your utility companies and get a cost estimate of what it's going to take to bring those utilities to that piece of property. That was another thing we looked at, was a piece of property that was kind of landlocked in with other pieces of property that were undeveloped. So we were looking at costing out with FPL, who is our power provider in that area. How much would it cost for us to get power run from the main road a couple of acres in to where we would potentially be buying? What were the ramifications of getting easement access to that property? Look at all of those things, figure out what those costs are, and that's going to be able to tell you if it's a $10,000 piece of property and it's the best deal ever, but you're going to have $150,000 of costs and potentially 2 years of wait time. Does that work for you? So those are the things to take into account. Okay, then moving on to, I'm looking down at my notes, special Southwest Florida or Florida concerns. The biggest, and I mentioned it, is water. So we have wetlands down here all over the place, pretty much so everywhere, unless you're in the northern part of the state, and they're probably up there too. I'm just not as familiar. So here in Southwest Florida, we have wetlands kind of intermixed everywhere. So what does that mean? You can build on land that has wetlands. Depending on the quality of those wetlands, you can pay to mitigate. So wetlands mitigation is something we were meeting with our Bible study group, and we're like, oh, can you be praying for this? And they're like, wait, what is that? What does that mean? So we were explaining it. We've gotten very good at explaining what wetlands mitigation is. Never thought I'd say that. So wetlands, because they're essential to the way that Florida functions, they have to be held. So if you have a 1/4 acre lot that is low quality wetlands, you have to pay for, if you want to develop that 1/4 acre, you have to pay for a 1/4 of an acre to be held in perpetuity somewhere else in the state. And those are called mitigation banks. So they hold land forever in a different part of the state that is of the same quality of wetlands. So for us, we bought a piece of property that was upland, which in the area that we're buying in is kind of a rare find, because those have all been snapped up a long time ago. So we had one more piece that was mostly, it's like 80%, I think, or 85% upland. But we do have a section that's wetland, so we are dealing with some wetland mitigation to be able to build the barn and everything that we're going to need for those big yellow pieces of equipment. So wetlands mitigation gives the state, I think it's a great thing ultimately, because it gives the state a chance to function environmentally the way it has to. Otherwise, we're going to end up with major water issues. So how do you find out if you have wetlands on your land? It is not necessarily in every real estate listing, and it's not in most of them. And some of them will claim that it's 100% uplands. You need a wetland survey to verify that. They have to give you the piece of paper, and if they can't, then they're just assuming it's 100% wetlands or upland. So you need that. You don't want to go into something assuming that everything the buyer says is accurate. Not that they're trying to be shysty, but they probably genuinely believe that, but you need the state to check that and stamp that. So if you don't have that, a lot of buyers are not willing to do the survey. There's a couple other things you can do. You can pay to have the survey done yourself if you're very serious about that piece of property. You already have an offer in maybe. Or if you're just kind of scouting out land, a great way that we did it, Robbie is a certified arborist. So for us, he already knew what to look for. There are plants that demarc wetlands and trees, plants and trees. So for us, we would recommend talk to a local arborist. Have them show you, pay for a consult with an arborist if that's the case. Have them show you the plants that you need to look for to delineate if it's potential wetlands. that'll give you an idea as you're just looking. You can see, so for another thing for us, bald cypress are an indicator of wetlands. We would look at the Google Maps, we would look at anything that could give us like a satellite view. Bald cypress are bald part of the year, so they're very easy to see from above. So that's a great thing. Get to know what those look like, Google them. Bald cypress, you're gonna look for certain ferns, figure out what those things are in your particular area of Florida that you're looking to build in, and what the state's going to be looking for in that particular area, and look for those. So if you see them, you know, okay, this may not be the best deal. What are the cost implications of wetlands on your land? Like I said, we do have some wetlands on our land, so we are familiar with this. We are not through the process. This has also been a year-long process. So it's another thing to consider is if you're buying land that does not already have the wetlands mitigation done, you're looking at easily a year-long process. It's not fast. Things with the state, especially this year, we had COVID issues, have not moved quickly. So they're scrambling to try to get them to move quickly, but in scrambling, they also changed our wetlands to assessment or whatever. So our wetlands are considered low quality wetlands because they don't hold water, and they just happen to have a couple of items, like there's a bald cypress tree and a couple of ferns, I think maybe, that say, okay, this is probably wetlands. So for us, that we knew that came back on the survey as low quality wetlands, but the state, in trying to rush, they assessed it as high quality even though they hadn't seen it. So we're trying to go back and say, hey, can you just come out and look at it and make sure you're sure about that? Because that will change the cost of how much you have to pay for mitigation. Hey, go out there. So you can count on easily $20,000 to $40,000 for a quarter acre, I would say. Talk to a wetlands mitigation bank, but they'll be able to tell you about how much that's going to cost. So I think that wraps it up. I need to go back to momming this one. This is our youngest. This is Winnie. Say hi. She's grumpy this morning. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Drop your comments or questions below and we'll be able to help you with anything that we can. Congratulations on starting the process. We're so excited for you. Like I said, we're here for all the questions because we have looked at probably a million pieces of property, it felt like. I know it'll feel like that too. And we were sure that like we knew what we wanted, and then we changed and tweaked a little bit, and then we looked at the numbers again, and then we looked at the numbers for bringing in power and how much that was going to cost, and had to mix certain ideas with that. So don't be afraid to make a lot of changes, a lot of mistakes probably along the way. But ultimately, I think you guys are going to end up, if you kind of walk through this process, we feel like we've ended up with an incredible piece of property at a great deal, and a great deal overall because we know what the costs are going to be and what the additional costs are. So hopefully that's helpful. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.